wanted to just give you a quick intro to the Beeck Center. The Beeck Center's mission stated is to improve systems that are the foundation for daily life, using data, design, technology, and policy as instruments for equitable societal change. And the GovTech project at the Beeck Center aims to identify critical challenges and opportunities for intervention and improvement in the GovTech markets, both in the US and globally, to promote openness, collaboration, and shareability, to foster innovation and enhance the quality of public services, and provide robust evidence-based guidance that can be utilized in efforts to deliver public services at the state, tribal, territorial, local levels. We spent some time on the broad international research that resulted in this data set and paper, and we've done some deep diving, primarily with the US Department of Labor and various state workforce agencies, on finding ways to bring them together to create an open shared model for unemployment insurance modernization. Yeah, so there's the team. You meet the team. This is the whole team, and you have us all here for the hour. We're going to try and wrap up our presentation by about 1:40 p.m. Eastern time. Leave about 20 minutes for questions. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. If you have a question you want us to address, that would be terrific. You can also reach us after this on email or LinkedIn. We're all pretty easy to find. So I said a minute ago, we're looking to identify critical challenges and opportunities in GovTech. What are those? So here are a few. First, for US states, government markets of vendors that help states deliver digital services have significant dysfunctions in those markets. Many of those markets have only a few entrants providing soup to nuts services, but there's not enough meaningful competition to drive significant improvement or innovation or efficiency. And in many cases, states look to those same markets to figure out what even to ask for in the first place, which creates fairly unhealthy closed loops. Software development practices that are considered state-of-the-art in the private sector are still finding their way into government many years in. Governments in the US rarely demand modularity or continuous improvement practices like Agile or human-centered design. And in fact, many contracting best practices and procurement habits cut against all of these basics. And of course, there's enormous unfulfilled opportunity for open source and open data to bring transparency to how government does what it does. Very few government systems in the US run on open source software. It's mostly black boxes all the way down. So we miss a lot of important chances to build public trust in how our institutions operate. So enter digital public goods, or DPGs, which are defined by the UN as open source software, open data, open AI models, open standards, open content that adhere to privacy and other applicable laws and best practices and do no harm and help attain the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. We suspect the world of DPGs can help meet the challenges and opportunities just enumerated. So that's why we're here. So then why landscape scan and why now? While in recent years, governments and philanthropy-driven efforts like the 50 and 5 program have been encouraging more international use of DPGs, our working hypothesis is that there's limited awareness and utilization of them in the US, especially in sub-federal governments, state, local, territorial, tribal. We wanted to know why, and we wanted to encourage governments to engage with the DPG ecosystem. So we started with this, a scan of what's out there that might be ripe for state and local governments to adopt, to replace or augment or update the digital systems that they use today to serve the public. So what DPGs exist and are being deployed successfully by and for government services here in the US or around the world? And what can US governments learn from and about them? And that's where I'm going to hand it off to our lead researcher, Eve. Eve, you're muted.
Yep, as per usual. Also, hi everybody. I'm Eve, a lead researcher for the GovTech team. Catchphrase for the GovTech team and the research that we're doing would definitely be copy, paste, and slightly innovate. So if you are with me, I like interactivity and energy. If you're with me in the chat, feel free to write, copy, paste, and slightly innovate. It will come up quite a bit during the presentation. So just like Aaron said, some federal governments here in the States with limited awareness, but there's an opportunity to make folks aware, which is why we did this research. So again, what we want to know is who's developing, stewarding, sharing DPGs in government, their target beneficiaries, who's using them, and how do DPG structure governance, and how do these organizations finance ongoing development and maintenance. On to the next slide, how we decide to approach our work is to basically first start off with a mass data, hey Tim, data research and data collection. So we analyze publicly available information on websites, reports, case studies to identify DPGs, reference the Digital Public Goods Alliance. So if everyone knows about B Corp, where organizations get the B Corp stamp to where they're doing good and being good, DPGA is basically certifying DPGs to ensure folks know that, hey, stamp of approval, this is definitely a DPG. At the time when we were doing our research, it was 157 digital public goods that they have certified, but we did the 80-20% rule. So 80% of the digital public goods in our sample set are from the Digital Public Goods Alliance registry, but the other 20% have not been certified yet. So we kind of acted as brand ambassadors for them to just showcase again how large and how much awareness is still needed in regards to DPGs. Once we were done, we did like an initial review in our desk research, identifying active products maintained within the last 5 years by tracking contribution histories. And then did voluntary validation calls. 27 out of 50 of the DPGs that we spoke to validated the data that we collected on them. We identified themes that informed our findings. And on the next slide, we developed 2 key resources, which you will hear some insights about from today. First, a database where we collected entity type, origin story, whether it was made initially within the context of the government or not, and then the government decided to use it, locations of origin, where it's been deployed, areas of focus, license type, deployment instances separated by in how many countries, where is the software or the standard or the code basically being used, how many times is it live, who has benefited, governance needs, funding model, and if applicable, if in the US what US funding has been given towards it, and of course the funding model. A few disclaimers around this data is this study is based on publicly available information, so there are definitely some data access constraints. DPGs, that's a call to action to update your websites for future iterations, please. The second is that our DPGs were primarily focused on government-related DPG use. On the next slide, you'll see our dashboard where we visualize key trends and themes of the data set. Continuing with the disclaimers, the DPG ecosystem is way larger than what we collected. We actually found 200 instances of DPGs being used in governments or organizations to watch out for. But because the research team is small and mighty, all of us are here, we decided to iterate in iterations of 50, right? And that's, outside of the 157 that was highlighted by the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And last but not least, we did voluntary validation calls. So participant protections were exempt because we were validating publicly available data. And on the next slide, I will pass it over to Vinuri to begin to help us understand what exactly did the data show us.
Thank you, Eve. Hi, everyone. My name is Vinuri Dissanayake, and I was one of the research assistants that helped bring this research to life. So as Eve mentioned, we've developed this data set and dashboard, and using it, we were able to identify some high-level insights as well as more nuanced themes within our sample of 50 DPGs in government use. The first, I guess, key insight that we were able to unpack was around entity type. So understanding which types of entities DPGs sit in and how they're funded can help stakeholders make informed decisions about adoption and sustainability. So what we discovered is that 46%, so basically half of our sample, sit within a non-profit model. These DPGs rely on public donations and philanthropic funding to maintain their DPGs. We found that approximately 26% are actually governed by for-profit organizations, so quite a smaller portion in terms of our sample set. So what this kind of led us to understand is that, while nonprofits actually benefit with greater autonomy, it also creates a challenge in terms of revenue uncertainty, which underscores the need for long-term financial support and sustainability planning by DPGs. Moving on, having understood where DPGs currently sit, we also wanted to understand how they came to be, what their origin story is. And what we found was quite interesting. So despite all 50 of our DPGs in our sample being in government use, only 28% were actually developed purely within government. The remaining 72% were developed through private entities or in a public-private partnership. This, again, to us, highlighted the importance of private and public collaboration in both innovating as well as maintaining the DPG landscape. Moving on, we, having understood entity, having understood where it came from, we then wanted to look, jurisdictionally, how are these DPGs being deployed, at least in our 50 DPG sample set. And what we found was that, DPGs are being used across a vast number of jurisdictions, both in the global north as well as in the global south. The top deployers were the US, the UK, Germany, as well as Canada. And observing that US actually emerged as the highest deployer in our sample actually compelled us to kind of re-examine our initial assumption that there was limited awareness and utilization of DPGs in the US, especially at the state level. There is also scope to, further examine, whether this trend is actually true as we broaden our sample set, or whether actually it's more of a lack of perceived use of DPGs in the US, and it's rather than about utilization and communication. So beyond our, high-level findings, we also observed some more nuanced themes in response to things like, what types of solutions do DPGs provide? How are we actually then governing these solutions that are quite complex? And then how are we sustaining them? What kinds of funding models do DPGs depend on? So our first kind of key theme was about better understanding the DPG landscape. We looked at solutions and what they aim to deliver, as well as the specific areas where they're being used. And we actually found considerable variation in both of these aspects, both in the United States as well as globally. In terms of the marketplace of DPG solutions, it ranged from, as Aaron mentioned, innovative standards to data, to content, to software that improve, government operations and public service delivery. Examples of solutions include management systems, data visualization tools, digital identification. We also then pivoted to kind of look at where these DPGs are being, what sectors are we and areas of focus are these DPGs being deployed in? Again, there was quite a degree of variation. We had examples such as Uwazi by HurriaDocs, which is a documentation platform for human rights defenders used purely in the justice domain. Similarly, MojoLoop by the MojoLoop Foundation is an open source software for creating payment platforms that will help unbanked people access digital financial services. But an interesting nuance to this theme that came out was that we also found DPGs that were domain agnostic. So more than 50% of the DPGs are versatile and actually scalable solutions that can be used in a variety of domains or areas. So examples like X-Roads, which is a data exchange, Forms SG, which is a forms builder, and Open Terms Archive, which is a public record system, can be deployed irrespective of the domain that it was initially built in. So moving on to the next theme, finally, having looked at, where things are deployed in, we also looked at governance. So how are DPGs ultimately being governed? And this is challenging, as you all probably know, because entities need to walk that fine line to preserve, productive open source practices, from balancing between openness and privacy to collaboration and oversight. So to actually assist in understanding and kind of, cross-examining our DPGs and their governance mechanisms, we used a governance framework by David Eves and his team to understand the key governance levers that DPGs in their samples are using. And he and his team actually proposed that DPGs require, firstly, a documented mission, vision, and values. Secondly, an external contribution channel. Thirdly, 2 advisory boards, so both a technical as well as a strategic one, and then a documented code of conduct. So in looking at those levers and then looking at our sample set, we actually found quite a wide variety of governance structures across DPGs, each with like a different combination of these governance levers. Only 28% of them were governed by all of the recommended elements of good governance as outlined by Eves. Some DPGs documented governance at the organizational level, but not at the product specific level, or the goods specific level, which is what it's recommended for. And then 72% of DPGs had a documented code of conduct, often modeled on the contributor covenant. And despite the fact that the framework actually recommends 2 distinct boards, only half of our sample had no documented board structure at all. So this to us suggests that, our research in terms of our research, that not all parts of the DPG governance framework are necessary at each stage. And that's what David Eads also recommends, given the different maturity levels of DPGs. However, the earlier good governance is established, the better it is for the long-term success and growth of the DPG. And to our final theme, we've covered solutions, the sectors that they're deployed in and how they're being, governed. We also wanted to understand, how do organizations fund the ongoing development and maintenance of DPGs? What we found was that 46% of DPGs are actually managed by nonprofits and 26% are by nonprofits. So nonprofits use public donations, philanthropy, and service fees, whilst for-profit use, primarily professional service fees. While traditional funding sources like donations and philanthropic funding are common, what we actually saw that was emerging was membership models as a key source of a funding mechanism. So they provide not only financial sustainability, but they also foster collaboration. So exploring the standards around membership models actually depend on a DPG's maturity, and it's actually quite beneficial in our space. We found that, although, our initial findings were that only 6 were using the membership model, as we were having our validation calls, we found that 3 more DPGs in this scan are moving and transitioning into this membership structure. But what's also interesting, and quoting Eve, copy, paste, and slightly innovate, the iterations of these membership models are also evolving. So we had examples like OS2, who uses a membership fee based on municipality, population size, product-specific fees, and ad hoc funding from member contributions, to say local Gov Drupal, which is funded by subscriptions from councils and suppliers and past government support. So the key takeaway for us here is that, in terms of, firstly, sustainability, membership models support long-term financial health, which is absolutely critical for the longevity of DPGs. Secondly, focusing on localized solutions, encouraging tailored approaches for local and regional needs. So thinking globally, but acting locally in terms of membership actually works really well for this contingent of DPGs that are emerging in this structure. And then finally, collaboration. So membership promotes transparency, accountability, and shared development, which is fundamentally the ethos of the DPG landscape. So moving to our applications. Eve.
Yes, of course. We don't do research for the sake of doing research, right? Everyone, we love applied research. So I want to walk you through how we actually had an amazing opportunity that Erin was talking about earlier in our call to apply this research in the context of the Open UI initiative, Open Unemployment Initiative. So on the next slide. So if you don't know, 19 states in the US are implementing projects supported by $204 million from the US Department of Labor Unemployment Insurance Information Technology Modernization Grants. Tongue twister. But we contributed to this initiative. One contribution was sharing insights specifically into how existing GovUse DPG solutions from our 50 DPG landscape scan can offer enhancements to the unemployment insurance system functionality, right? We want to instill confidence in state leaders and new and existing vendors to continue improving on the efficiency and driving innovation within the UI space through the use of using DPGs to support them. So again, copy paste inside the innovate. Look and see how we did that. So sharing with members of the US Department of Labor, NASWA, leaders in UI state agencies, we shared a database with them of general use functionalities in unemployment insurance. So what do I mean by that? On the next slide, you're going to see, and whoever is within the government right now, feel free to put in the chat or any functionalities that you feel like you would like support in. But we aligned on which general use functionalities to start with, which again can be attributable to many public services because general use. And we cross-referenced them with the 50 DPG solution functionality. So we asked during our sessions, very similar to what I said here, like which of these functionalities do you think need an upgrade in your unemployment insurance context, or should we copy and paste what you have on your team, right? But many folks in the session were like, excuse me, Eve, all of them. Some folks were like, yeah, just give me all. Folks were excited and curious, which is exactly what we wanted. And on the next slide, you'll see additional functionalities that we also cross-reference. So on the next slide, and just so you know, that list isn't exhaustive. There's a lot more that we can iterate on as we continue. But at a high level, to ensure that we're all tracking, we presented these key descriptor stats for them with the database, but we classified DPGs under reuse potential in UI, which high, medium, low. High and medium means, yes, this product addresses a need UI team has. This product has been used successfully elsewhere. It's worth looking at, might be worth looking at, do further investigation. Low basically just meant there's no reuse possibility specifically in the context of UI that we noticed, but it can make sense for other public services and whatnot. So again, at a high level, we found 11 high confidence, 13 medium confidence, 27 low confidence DPG open source solutions. And what was exciting was that there was at least 5 examples of functionalities that are listed here: identity verification, authentication, application logging, notification, account management, workflow management. As in, the grocery store has many products to buy in the DPG landscape scan that could be used in the context of UI. Next, for the leaders, we also wanted to begin contextualizing what DPGs can do in the unemployment insurance systems. I see a question, Kit. So we wanted to show them some real world applications. We wanted to show some examples where real world applications can be used. So we showcased about 10 spotlights, but for the sake of time, I'm only going to showcase 2 for today. So the first one is Digit by eGov. They're an open source platform that helps governments manage municipal services. They provide a digital interface for citizens to access services and for officials to manage operations, making public service delivery more efficient and transparent. They have benefited 1.8 billion citizens to date. They're in 10 to 20 countries, deployed in the range of 100 to 500 times. And they basically captured many of our general use functionalities as a solution that focuses on them as a management system, a citizen engagement tool, and e-credentialing. On the next slide, we don't have any time for us to really nerd out completely on this slide overall. This is like the service architecture of these like the building blocks of the service architecture. But overall, just know and see that this is an open source system that has been reused by other governments over and over again. So we can learn from this. So if, for example, with your team, for the government folks who are sitting here, like back-end organization, talking about data schema, it should align with front-end usability, information architecture for like seamless functionality, right? So practical steps for a team, if you can allocate for your team to assess your current systems, map out your legacy systems and their existing data structures, collaborate on a data schema, with the support of DPG documentation, because we were just basically just all within DPG documentation to provide this output for NASWA and USDOL and the state leaders. You can then align to some backend requirements with user-centric goals, and of course, begin developing a pilot and iterating. Now, you know, the whole entire notion of the copy, paste, and slightly innovate. I know I said this step by step like it was a walk in the park when I'm really asking you to design the park in and of itself, but it's doable. Allocate 20% of your team's time to ideate for 80% of change. If you know the story of Apple, you know exactly where I'm going with this. On the next slide, just one more example before we give you guys a special treat on some further research. OpenSPP, okay, they're an open source platform designed to improve social protection programs. They help governments digitize and streamline management, ensuring that benefits reach the right people efficiently while reducing administrative overhead. They're in about 3 to 9 countries. And again, they capture a lot of our general use functionalities and have pretty robust amount of solutions within them. On the next slide, you'll see at a very high level, their building blocks, their modules can be very parallel to the flow of, say, for instance, a claimant who needs to apply for unemployment insurance, right? They're built on 60 open source modules themselves, and they contribute to many open source solutions out here in the market today. So again, copy paste, and you know the rest, slightly innovate. Now, what's next? We have some more for you. Granted, so if you're excited, we have more to share with you. I'm really excited about that. But in our research, we looked at a high level quantified governance, was looking at funding models, but we realized we needed to like deep dive into it. So we begin to have some in-depth interviews with some DPGs around their governance and their finance. But I just want a prerequisite. This is preliminary. This is the first round of analysis and synthesis. This is the sneak peek of a sneak peek, okay, of just some things that we found. And Orit, our amazing research assistant, will share some findings with you. But overall, our research goal was to basically, we wanted to see if we could begin compiling not necessarily best practices. I don't think there's best practices in this space, but promising practices of governance mechanisms and financial models of successful DPG initiatives in government use. So let's get into it. Odit, feel free to take it away.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Orit, and I was a research assistant on this specific research project. So I'm just gonna very high level share some of the research questions and the methodology that we went through for this research. So the research questions were focused on 2 main areas. The first area was governance structure, really learning more about how does decision-making process look like for the DPGs. And the second area was more focused on financial operations, really learning deeply into the financial strategies, how these strategies were evolved, under what entity does the DPG sit, what are the main challenges, what are the lessons, and how does the future look like for these DPGs in terms of financial strategies. And just kind of like to share very high level the methodology for this research. So the first stage was data collection. We interviewed 10 DPGs overall, 6 were gov-made and 4 were non-gov-made. We had an interview guide with the questions that we define, and we asked exactly the same questions, all the DPGs, to make sure that we're consistent with the data collection. The second stage was more focused on analysis and synthesis, meaning that we went through all the interview and we coded them based on the research questions that we defined. And the third stage, which we are currently in, is the preliminary findings, identifying initial findings based on these interviews coding. And the next step will be identifying key themes for the final report. So specifically today, we're going to focus on preliminary findings that are related to the financial operations, and that will focus on financial support and sustainability. What does it look like for DPGs? And also, of course, discussing some of the funding strategies. How did they get there? What helped them? What were the challenges? And what are the next steps? And I think what it is important to kind of like note here is that we had to main assumptions when starting this research. The first one was related to the financial and funding aspect, that financing DPGs is a challenge across DPGs, and it's a complex topic. And the second assumption is we really understand the importance of DPGs as part of the public service and as part of the community. So these were kind of like our approaches when starting this research. And just kind of like to share high-level insights based on the sample size that we had. So we had 10 DPGs overall, as I shared. 8 out of these 10 DPGs were sitting in nonprofits, and 6 out of the DPGs were receiving their initial funding investment by the governments. I think another interesting kind of like aspect is that we found out that 4 out of the 10 DPGs were providing services to the global community. So meaning that they had a more kind of like international expanded approach, while 6 were more dedicated to the national community and focused on local needs. And here you can see, based on our sample, the kind of like distribution of funding. So this is based on the 10 DPGs that we interviewed. And we can see that out of the 10, 8 were receiving support from the government. So the government were actually, in this specific sample, a very large funding support system for the DPGs. But we can also see that there's kind of like expansion to other channels, more involvement of the community. So that's through memberships, crowdfunding, public donations, and of course, there were also funding sources that came from philanthropy, international organizations, private equities. And I think what was interesting that we also noticed that more and more DPGs are approaching towards the professional services fees. And this kind of like leads me to our first preliminary finding, which is related to mitigating risk and to funding strategies. So what was interesting is that all the DPGs that we spoke with were discussing about the challenges as part of kind of like creating a sustainable financial models. And related to that, what was also interesting that they brought up the importance of the diversifying funding resources. So as we saw in the previous slide, the government is a very kind of like heavily reliant, specifically based on our sample. It is important kind of like to note that. So what was kind of like discussed is how these DPGs are going to actually diversify and expand these channels of funding. I think what is interesting is also that we found that they were talking about the challenges that are related to the fact that there is a high level of dependency on government funding. So for example, DPGs that are more heavily dependent on government funding are more vulnerable to public administration burdens and changes in political structures, and of course, changes in budget allocation. So having a more diverse approach creates a more balanced and stability and resilient for these DPGs financial models. And here you can see some of the quotes that kind of like emphasizes the point and the preliminary finding that we found. And just kind of like to build upon that finding inside, we also kind of like discussed with the DPGs, how are they going to approach this? And how are they going to shift from like dependency towards more diversity? So what we found was interesting is that more DPGs are discussing and expanding the opportunity for memberships and kind of like, as I said, involving more the community in terms of like as a funding resources, more professional fees, and in general, just expanding more opportunities for funding to create a more resilient and balanced approach. While saying that, it is important to emphasize that the governments, local and national, are very play a critical role in the funding and the sustainability of DPGs. So it's not completely shifting to independency, rather, but more focusing and emphasizing a more balanced partnerships that really creates stability and resilience for those DPGs. And I'm gonna shift it back to Eve. Yeah.
For the sake of time, I'll be quick with this part. And then to Yan, to your question about some DPGs have more than one funding sourcing type. Thank you, Aaron. Okay, so what now? Well, all this information. Our goal of this project was to increase conversation, let people know where action is being taken. I think if you are here, then you know that we can work smarter and not harder. We can be a partner, maybe have a and contribute to a budget to kick back to a DPG to maintain the software standard, the code, the system that we need. We can include in our procurement that vendors have a selection of DPG vendors to partner with. DPGs need strong agreements with this to manage the information sharing and quote unquote intellectual property. But if you're leaving here with more questions for yourself and your team, then great, we've done our job, right? But if you need some more support, I'll end it with this. Next, for our areas of reflection, to those sitting in government, delivering and modernizing public services, I like practicality. The team loves practicality, providing ease so that people can get into action. We do have questions at the end of our paper for teams within the government to use with this data set to begin discourse of what DPG adoption can look like. Earlier to Vineri's point around that, you may potentially even be already using one, you just don't know. So just like highlighting just that within your context. But overall, I think we can all be committed to a GovTech market that we can be proud of, right? Perhaps, an emphasis on the perhaps, because we need to keep iterating, we need to keep listening, we need to keep meeting people where they are. But if we can if we want to have impact on choice, like movement from monolithic to modular systems, how valuing system-wide stagnation to continuous evolution, impacting quality from top-down mandates to user-driven solutions, we need to keep moving away from just like a few large vendors or redefining how we partner with these few large vendors. Any projects on modernizing the rigid procurement processes, please include me. And also moving away from like, this is the way that it's gotta be, thinking to that which basically often shapes our public service delivery. Digital public goods are not offer a tool, not the tool. I want to be very clear about that. It's offering a tool in how agencies can have a choice in meeting the unique needs of people. Because there's this collaborative knowledge in the market that allows for us to copy, paste, and slightly innovate. But there is a big need around the governance around DPGs, especially in partnerships with governments. We're making sure that they get their funding like locked in so they could just continue to do the good work that we need. Remember, we found upwards of 200 instances of digital public goods being used in governments potentially, right? So like we don't need any more. We need more depth, not breadth. So in this sample set of the 50, we hope that it can support the government officials who are sitting here today and to go back to your team to begin doing more discourse. So I'll just end with this thought in case it may seem a little scary. This quote sits in Aaron's home office. Nobody in government wants to be the first to do something, but everybody wants to be the second. You're not going to be the second. If you're on this call, you're not going to be the second. Even to the DPG developers here, I see the laugh. Even to the DPG developers here, vendors, some vendors are signed up to also be here as well. We need to reframe how we go about continue refining the design, the build, the deployment, the procurement practices within the GovTech space to shape a better future for public services. And we hope that digital public goods as one of the solutions can help further that change. And I'll end there so we can have time for questions. Thank you all for listening. Appreciate you all so much. Connect with the Beeck Center.
I'm just going to add one note that we didn't end up adding on the slides, which is that the funding for this particular project is up at the end of this calendar year, which is to say in a couple of weeks. So if there are folks who know of anyone who might want to pick this up and run with it, or keep it moving in some way, crowdsourced or otherwise, yeah, give us a shout. We've had a really interesting almost year, not quite year, getting this stuff going, and we'd love to see it continue. So irony. Excellent.
Thank you, Carolina. I see your comment. There will be a recording for this. It will we'll basically upload the recording to the site that has all of this outputs in the GovTech page at the Beeck Center. Oh, Sean, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It was just 2 to 3 months of our brains for your 1 hour of attention and hopefully 20% of your team's time digging into this, So let me know. Feel free again to reach out to myself or Aaron or any of us on LinkedIn, in case you're thinking about like how to like to infuse it, like now what do we do with this? Because now I know folks are kind of just like, all right, like how can we move forward to like incorporate DPGs? You really need to like I'm a medical anthropologist by trade, and there's a concept of asset-based community development, which was coined around the same time of UX. You need to completely truly understand like and audit what you currently have, which I'm assuming a lot of teams have. Unemployment insurance, let's be real, is getting a lot of the coin and most likely will for some time because of COVID. New administration is changing, but conversations can be had. Some strategic planning can definitely be had with this. And DPG developers are really nice. Like just email them. They will respond to you and just be like, oh, okay, like let's partner. Like, so don't be afraid to message them once you go through the data set and realize like, okay, we need help in this particular functionality. Like, let's reach out to this DPG developer and whatnot. Just going through the chat real quick.
Jens,
Ooh,
could you maybe clarify your question a little bit? What's the if you want to, I don't know if you want to just unmute or if you want to put it in the chat, but I'm curious about the challenge.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I've seen a lot of, especially like Northern European municipalities starting from scratch with the solution, even though there are many similar already. So they don't want to be the second, they want to be the one who invents the thing. But perhaps that is sort of like a hybris of the Northern Europe.
Is that it? It's possible that in some governments where this has started to make some headway that how do I put this? Doing the work, doing this kind of work you're not the first doing it anymore. There are successful examples where people get some accolades for doing this kind of work in-house and open source, and so now there's a sort of a trail for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And I guess specifically what I've seen a lot is sort of like municipalities wanting some sort of like forms builder tools for processes. And I think I've seen like 4 or 5 of those, like one built in Denmark, one built in Sweden, one built in the Netherlands, and so on.
Interesting.
I saw a comment about what surprised you during the research, something that we didn't include here, but that we kind of noticed in our review of literature. Because the digital public goods, the definition of it is attached to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which and whatnot, you see a lot of literature focusing on what people now want to call the global South versus the global North instead of like first world or second world or third world, when it's really just like who was colonized and who was not. Let's be real. I like to be spicy if you didn't know. So I realized that I think to what Verneri was pointing to a little bit earlier is that open source has been around for a while. You know, it had its peak and then it, basically came down. There's like literally nothing new under the sun. Everything that we use every day is built on open source, but there's this like it's almost like this technical digital literacy like obstacle that we still need to get over, even though there's executive orders including talking for say governments to include like AI into their work now. So I think we need to do better. I don't know if we need to make like a Netflix series. We were talking about when we were presenting at Harvard 3 weeks ago. Like, do we need to make a Netflix series called like, open source and government scandal, like just to get people to just realize that we've already been doing this. It's already here. We just need to take a little bit more coordinated action. And again, there are instances like OS2. Remember, OS2 is in 92 out of 98 municipalities in Denmark. They have like 12 products. They have like 12 to like 15 products that are being used across their municipalities. So again, there's like nothing new under the sun. I think it's just like when people think of digital public goods, they think of the global north supporting the global south and all the literature and the funding going there. When just like in your back door in these United States of America, people needed public services delivered to them, as of yesterday. So that's what kind of surprised me in the research, is just like the communication and the communication of open source, digital public goods, digital public infrastructure. Someone I think is talking about public digital infrastructure. I think we need to take time getting out of like the theory and just doing more work. So more instances of what happened in this research, where we did research, but it was directly correlated to a project that was being implemented in real time that we could be able to apply the research to, with the Open UI initiative, the Open Unemployment Insurance Initiative. So we probably need some more call to actions of like applied research, not just research, if that makes sense.
I just wanted to just dovetail on what the question Jan asked and something you said, Eve, which is municipalities that are endeavoring to build their own versions of different tools. I don't think is necessarily a contradiction of that quote that Eve shared. I think it's more of a symbol of that kind of copy paste and slightly innovate that people are taking kind of too literally, that when we identified, for example, that, our initial working assumption was that DPGs are not used very broadly in the US states, but actually we found that the US is one of the leading deployers. But what's potentially lacking is the ability of states and, say, municipalities to actually talk to each other and understand, actually, we're doing similar things. We don't need to recreate and reinvent the wheel. We probably need to kind of talk to you about the architecture of your wheel and how we need to slightly innovate on that in our own context. And that conversation piece between jurisdictions is what's essentially missing to actually fully exploit the advantages of open source and DPG. So to Caroline's point as well, like open source, it's already here. So having those conversations and profiling, and this is one of the, I guess, primary kind of endeavors of this research piece, is to profile, is to actually advocate and share, look, even amongst this like DPG sample set, there's a lot of great work happening. So if your state or your municipality is trying to build the very thing that's already been built somewhere else, leverage it, copy, paste, and slightly innovate, right? So, yeah.
Let the catchphrase live on as we close out to the GovTech project.
Yeah, I mean, my motivation for doing this project, quite candidly, was exactly this, was to make it clear that diving into using DPGs in, to administer public services is not something crazy and new and untested, but something that is happening at scale all around the world, reliably, securely, efficiently, cost effectively, and to make the water warmer. To Eve's point, like you will not be the first diving into this. So if the data set and the report do nothing else, I hope that they get around enough that we start to change the Overton window on how people understand this stuff.
And and connect this research to just the overwhelming number of like how what is it again, Aaron? 17% of government technology implementations fail. No, succeed. Only 17% of them succeed. What
Yeah.
And the reason for that being is that usually people are like either highly delayed or nothing actually gets like deployed, right? And if that number or that stat to wanting to consider, like if we can increase our ability to pilot, if we can increase our ability to meet people where they are, leverage modules that are out there already for what we need, then I don't know, tell it to them like a love story. Stop looking for what's shiny and new, that that hot spicy just met the person. No, you're looking for the familiar love, the long lasting love, the love that will always be there, aka the services that people need. Communicate it to your folks, depending on like where you sit in the government around that. Yes, I see some connection happening in the chat. We love it. This is exactly what we want. Quite honestly, if I had a magic wand, I would love, so someone please take this and spin it if you want to, but like to just get all the DPG developers together with certain like government officials and then like their IT teams and just do like like almost like a Socratic seminar roundtable situation where states have to like share, in a sense, it depends. I don't know, that might be too much, but like share what needs they have and how like and DPG developers kind of like respond to like how the open source solution can help them. I think we need more coordinated action like that. It's time to just put people in the room together. Even if a DPG is only focused within their nation, you know what I mean? They're very so much excited to like provide support to folks outside of the context of their work.
So there was a question by Kit around the methods that were used to find and reach out to our key audiences and users. And Kit, I'm assuming it's you know, in terms of reaching out to the DPGs that we included in our data set. I think the steps were kind of, initially we started with the digital public goods registry, and that kind of became the baseline. But the more we kind of, you know, investigated and prosecuted the landscape, we found that actually the registry didn't fully capture everything that was out there. And so we realized that if we really wanted to be comprehensive with our sample set, we needed to go broader. So you'll find that when you have some time to have a look at the data set, we kind of delineate between the ones that were included in the registry and ones that were not. And then from there, as Eve said, everyone was pretty happy to reach out to us. So once we started deep diving and doing our desktop research into each of the DPGs, we found the right, you know, the different stakeholders that were associated. We reached out to them and said, give us 30 minutes of your time or an hour of your time. We'd love to learn more. And what was really interesting in these conversations was that, you know, whilst a lot of this was documented publicly, a lot of what they were doing wasn't. And so, you know, part of building out, or rather the value of this data set and the accompanying dashboard, was like drawing out these things of like, how are they governing themselves? How are you transitioning into a membership model? These were things that were happening in the works, but hadn't surfaced. And so we were able to draw on some of those insights and share it. And I think it helped build momentum for us, but also built momentum for them to kind of go, actually, we probably need to share this more broadly and start collaborating a little bit more in terms of what's happening.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that point. I completely agree with what you said. And I think what was really interesting and insightful is to see how different DPGs connected us to other DPGs that they were familiar and collaborating with. So that was really very insightful to learn. So many of the DPGs that we actually approached were through previous connections and meetings and calls that we were able to already to schedule. So just kind of like getting through the network. And there's so much potential that is not yet fulfilled. So yeah, definitely something to point out.
I know we have 2 minutes left. Anybody else want to share really quickly, popcorn style? If folks want to get off the camera, what's one word to share like your sentiments in regards to like what we presented today? We could do one word popcorn style. Feel free to put in the chat. Or feel free to put in the chat, what do you feel like you want to do next with what we presented with you all today? Would be curious to know. Hey, feel free, Bolaji. Share with the deaf. Yes, Evan.
I was just going to break the silence since I saw everyone. Right. So I was pretty much waiting to see if I could hear from others who would like to share what they would like to do moving forward. But I'm Bolaji here from the Digital Public Goods Alliance, the stewards of the DPG registry and the standard. And first, I'm super excited to see the research itself. I think it's great work, and we do want to see more people do more work around DPGs like this. And we're super excited about that, more particularly hearing more of how everyone has shared stories and how they intend to use this research. And the good part would be that many of the projects you mentioned, for example, are not on the registry itself. A couple of them are actually on the pipeline, and we look forward to expanding more of this. And like you mentioned in the earlier part of your research, you had like 170 something-ish DPGs, and we have about 180 of them now. And I think it's an ever-evolving landscape, and we need more people involved. And this is what the Alliance itself tries to steward among an alliance of government members. And I mean, we're looking forward to working with everyone, and great work to the team on this research.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for coming. I didn't know. Okay, represent. Thank you. I'm glad it's growing. And definitely see in the chat. Thank you for that. Some folks, yes, submit to the registry. You guys need to hire us as brand ambassadors. I'm just gonna call it for what it is. Allison, thank you for that. Questions you're wrestling with is scaling, replication, and capacity to implement. Palm, it was your first intro to DPGs. Excited to learn more. Everett, you said share with a dev. Come on, talk about it. This is already great. This really makes me all excited as well too. Again, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. Would be fine to strategize and thought partner with folks on how to bring this within your teams and how to even begin thinking about like a agile action plan framework. But we reached the end of our time, and we want to respect everyone's time. And I just want to tell you all, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you all. This was great.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.